What up, guys? Welcome back to part two. Part two comes after part one. So if you haven't watched part one yet, make sure that you click up here, go watch that so this makes more sense. If you already have, welcome back and enjoy. If you can't pick it up off the floor, you shouldn't be rowing it. That should be a rule. That's awesome, right? So the thing here, now again, this is the only thing where I'm not 100% sure what Dorian would say this was ideally for. So this is where, again, I might say from a programming standpoint, we might have different goals here. I'm pretty sure I've heard him say, let me see if I can get this kind of stopped at the top. I don't know if I can do it. All right, close enough. I'm pretty sure I've heard him say that this was more of a lat exercise for him, which for most people, yeah, we'll try and there we go, that's all right. For most people, if we're looking at your body and we're looking at that degree of elbow flare, so again, if this were me and I was in the exact same bone position, I would think this would be a much better upper back exercise. Now again, the huge difference between Dorian and I, and we'll talk about it a little bit on another exercise, is the bigger a muscle, it actually changes internal moment arms. So internal moment arms are going to be determined by where that tendon is. So again, where that tendon is actually technically the line of force for that muscle, and where the line of force from that tendon pulling on that bone crosses the joint affects the mechanical advantage. Now again, you don't have to necessarily understand that, but literally as a muscle gets bigger, that line of pull for that tendon changes. And so lats are one of the biggest things where this makes a difference. So for most normal people, doing a bent over row like this won't be a whole lot of lats, just because again, even me, I'm especially me compared to Dorian, but out here, this doesn't line up with anything for lat. It's all upper back stuff. And if we look through his programming, which we do, obviously, we'll get through everything. He doesn't have anything that I would say is really isolating more upper back stuff. It looks like more lat stuff. Unless I'm misquoting or misinterpreting, I think this is a great upper back exercise, even for Dorian. A lot of people like to poop on this, literally poop on it, stop pooping on it. So if we look from the side, so let's kind of approximate where his bent at the hip is. So if, So if here's his hip, here's his torso angle. Let's say it's something here, and here's his legs. So people call this like a very upright torso, you know, so when he's got his upper arm and he's got the plates pulled in here, you know, they're pulled up in here to the hip, and here's his elbow somewhere flared back here, and here's his shoulder joint somewhere here. So a lot of people say, hey, if you're going to do a bent over row, be bent completely over. I mean, yes, that produces a little bit more range of motion as far as shoulder flexion extension being loaded. But in my opinion, it's also kind of like none of that's a great exercise for rowing necessarily, because you're concerned about, I want a little bit more length loaded, but you're still right in the muscles mid-length. If you want to lengthen your lat, do a pullover. So when people do this more upright position, I'm generally just looking at it for more of an upper back exercise, because if we look at kind of where this line of force is and what he's pulling in opposition with, it just more lines up with upper back stuff. So again, if this is the line straight through here, let's change colors because I feel like it. So if the direction of this line of force now, what does it kind of pass through? Up here, like what can actually pull from here? It's all upper back stuff. So you can see these things up here. Those look pretty big to me. And again, if he would turn around, all this stuff up here from everything behind the shoulder and upper arm is really in a great position to work. And if we look at all the stuff about him for how heavy this weight is, the minimal amount of motion he has, in my opinion, overall is very impressive. So I think this is an absolutely great upper back exercise. I think it's a good place to put it here from a programming standpoint. We've done 2 lat things prior to this. Now we're moving on to upper back. Now again, what would be the only thing maybe you can modify from here? So again, if Dorian did this for lats, this would be something I think maybe only Dorian could do. Or if you have lats like Dorian, you could probably do it for lats as well too. But for most other people, great upper back option. And again, you'll see here where he programs deadlifts later in the program. The only thing I would say from here, from a standpoint, is if you wanted just upper back to be the limiting factor, you could also consider using a chest pad, which he gets to on another exercise. So again, let's say I want to do this thing, and, you know, let's say this is the angle that he's doing. It's mainly upper back. You can do everything exactly the same except with a chest pad. You know, take hips, take erectors out of it. And again, if the goal is more upper back, I think that would be a fine practice. But again, all this kind of stuff is, some people do like the idea, hey, my upper back grows a lot when I'm bent over doing it anyway. And at the same time, I'll just take the more erector stimulus because I just want my erectors so ginormously thick that if I got stabbed, I would survive. So what do we have next? Single arm. So now I'm confused now, because single arm stuff, if we talk about it now on social media, if you do single arm, you're not hardcore. And if you do it on a machine, you're definitely not hardcore. So is this Dorian Yates, is he hardcore here or not? I'm not really sure. This is the one I wanted to show. This is really tough angle I was trying to get here. I'll show it close here. This is almost in the position I want to show, right here. So big things here. is the arm path. So again, you can't tell here. This is again one of those machines that comes the teeniest bit closer together and comes out just a little bit, but it really promotes this shoulder width arm path. And from a lat standpoint, this is awesome. And so again, someone will look at this from the front and say, again, it looks a little bit flared. The thing that we have here is the mirror. And look at here, this is the contact point. He's not even quite all the way back yet, but his tricep is literally smashing into his lat. So again, what is his tricep covering? His humerus. What is the lat attached to? The humerus. So this is where some of these cues go out the window for large human beings. This is something that I found super interesting because I've trained some of the largest humans on the planet, is again, I could tell everybody, you know, a 180-pound nerd on TikTok can tell everybody, this is the perfect position for rowing for lats. And they'd see some big giant guy rowing like this and go, well, he's not doing optimal and blah, blah, all that kind of shit. Well, if you literally look at large enough human beings, get to a point where tissue will be the actual thing that determines their range of motion, not necessarily just bone structure. And again, this is an example. Well, because his lat flares out here, and the average TikTok nerd who critiques this form, his lat's down here, and it frowns and it's sad, whatever. If I could actually draw how that tendon of the average TikToker's lat attaches to their humerus and how Dorian's attaches to his humerus, it completely changes internal moment arms. So again, basically it gives him a bigger target to hit. Now again, for Dorian, this works freaking great. For bigger guys, that's one of the most common cues I use for training lats, is I'm not actually focused on upper arms. I'm close to make sure wherever they finish, if they're coming into that shortened position, they're smushing their tricep into their lat. So that is a great cue the bigger that you are. Now, if you're smaller, I'm not picking on the smaller guys because I'm not very big right now, is keeping your upper arm into your side and having a shoulder width grip is still a great place to go for a more lat biasing row. But you just got to realize, again, this is where stuff on paper might sound cool or whatever, but you actually have to have a little better understanding of how anatomy actually works and what that looks like on different humans. And so again, all around, this is just a great exercise option. And he's going single arm. So the same thing here, he might be going single arm. I don't know for sure the reason he's going single arm, because he could do both at the same time and he could use the chest support. But I'm guessing he figured out, hey, my lat is this thing. It moves from my bone from here to here. And he just felt, okay, well, I can have that happen better if I shift this way or that way on the machine instead of going just where the machine is. So a lot of guys do single arm rowing stuff now, and smart guys do it just for that reason. You know, they do it with the idea of, okay, I want this to be the path that I am. I'm gonna make sure that I match that path to the machine and not maybe making the machine obviously or the other way around. I don't go and just sit arbitrarily in where a machine takes me. I'm gonna sit in a machine so it can go where I want and just load where I want to load. Now the thing we'll look at with this is another example of this machine's loading pattern isn't great. Again, doesn't mean anything super bad, doesn't mean you throw it in the garbage, doesn't mean you can't get big doing it, but ideally it would be heavier here and lighter here. So this is, again, if we're gonna nerd on something a little bit, hey, if you have the option, which could be something like some prime piece or something else, or some other stuff that has this, where it makes it heavier here and lighter here, great. But all that being said, you do what you can do. And watch what happens here. So pay attention to what I said last time with that spotting thing, and let's see how his training partner spots here. Let's get that mess off of there. For the mass. Gosh, I just want to pay somebody to yell that at me in a British accent. For the mass. So again, we'll watch the set again, mainly because I want to watch it. I'll turn the volume on in a minute, but watch where he goes, and I don't even remember, so hopefully I don't sound like an idiot on here, but watch how he goes, you know, where he can actually get to on his own, and watch the range of motion he fatigues first. It's not out here, it's gonna be in here. So that's why for all back stuff, having a pattern where heavier to here, will lighter here, will allow for a little bit more of a complete failure through the range of motion, not just one point. So watch where he spots him. Just a tad right there, that's the first spot right at the end. A little bit more, a little bit earlier. And then from here, almost right from the beginning, pushing all the way to the finish. So again, it's a little lesson in spotting there as well too. I would have spotted up by his hand. Get that right, Leroy, because it would have been less work for him. Easier to push up there than down here. But that's the same thing. So again, I talk a lot, if you watch my stuff, about profiles, and I like to hopefully educate people on that a little bit. So just say, hey, this is where this should be or that should be, and this is, you know, maybe obviously better than that. But the easy fix that you can have as well there too is going to be something where you have a spotter. You know, so again, if you don't have the perfect profile, you can easily fix it with a competent or a good spotter. Only other thing I want to point on that is he has a bit of a rotation component there as well too. If someone is good at training their lats and they are making sure that if there's any rotation-y thing happen, if there's any side bendy thing happening, it can come from additional lat stimulus or help. But if you're not good at using your lats, lots of times if you bend or you twist, it just comes from other things that you're better at using. So again, it could be obliques, QL, stuff like that. Next is gonna be rear delts. I'm just gonna mute this one because who wants to hear somebody yell at somebody over rear delts? This machine's great overall for rear delts. Again, loading pattern's okay, but the idea is he's face down. Let's see if I could just stop when he's at the top. There we go. Let's see if we go a little bit earlier so I can get a little bit of a better angle here. First rep, yeah. Let's see if I get it there, that'll be a better angle. So the only thing I'm gonna say here for rear delts is he found the angle that feels the most comfortable for him. So again, if we're looking at his body position, where his spine is and where that upper arm is, it's this slightly teed out. And you can't tell from here, again, it's actually, watching this video and going through, we'll see it. It's a little bit behind him, so it's not quite perfectly this high elbow position. It's back just a little bit. But what else is awesome about this machine? He's got his chest supported, so nothing can move. It's loaded through the upper arm, which is actually awesome. There's nothing wrong with obviously doing cables or reverse pec tech or holding onto a dumbbell, but it's impossible to take the elbow joint out of it. So again, as long as you have a load pulling you this direction in your hand, so again, if he had his arm out here and there's a load pulling him that direction, your elbow will be loaded being pulled into flexion, which means your elbow extensors, triceps will always work a little bit. So it'd be great if there were more tricep machines actually loaded through the upper arm just to take the elbow out of it. So a great way to train the rear delts. This is one of the only parts where I would say we go through his session. And next he does some bent over rear delts. You know, so this would be the type of thing, not that Dorian would ask me, but he's almost in the exact same position. So, you know, his upper arm is here, his elbows are pretty flared out. You know, that rear delt's obviously in a great position to work. So from a position standpoint, he's great. What does this dumbbell do? This dumbbell is really just heavy at the top. So if we're looking here, we do that moment arm thing. We're gonna draw the moment arm to the shoulder joint. There's peak torque right here when he's at the bottom, right there. We clear all this mess off of here. We do the line of force again. We'll go this way. Where's the moment arm at this point in time? It's almost non-existent, so maybe it's right there, just passing through the joint. It's got a little baby moment arm. There's no joint torque in that position, no challenge. So I would say he's trained the exact same range of motion. He's just getting some more rear delt stimulus. Again, it's rear delts, not really a make or break thing. But again, if someone was like, hey, should I do these 2 exercises? I'd say, well, if you, let's say the goal is to have here, maybe he wanted 2 working sets total or 4 working sets total. I'm not sure if in this workout he was doing 1 or 2 working sets, but I would say, hey, if you want to do 4 working sets total, maybe just do them all in that first exercise. It's the same thing, it's a little bit more stable, and you get some load from the bottom as well too. Again, that's kind of like nitpicky stuff, not really a good or bad way, but just arguably more efficient additional stimulus. Instead of going from an exercise I think is a little bit better to one that's a little bit inferior. Again, Dorian didn't ask. His rear delts look massive, so. Yeah, there, look at that meat. Meat! Just look at his back for a minute. Okay, next, we got some low back extensions. So I find it funny that he did it in this order, so this might be something that I would change a little bit, but you know, this is one of those things where I don't know, in some ways it just makes it more awesome that he finishes with deadlift. So anyway, if I was gonna do something slightly different here, I think I would rather prioritize the deadlifts before doing low back extensions. But again, this is if I had an athlete that had a preference, they'd rather do it like this, because this might be the place where, again, some of this pre-exhaust stuff I get on paper where it might not be the optimal thing, but other people don't know what it's like to be. Like, I have no idea what it's like to be, at the time of this video, he's probably like 280 and in shape or something, right? I don't know what that's like. And obviously you don't know, with someone like this high of a level that has great perception of their body, you don't know what it feels like to have to deadlift the amount of weight he has to deadlift to get the type of fatigue or stimulus or failure points that he wants. So he puts his deadlifts at the very end of the workout, is still doing 4 plates and some change. And again, from a, yeah, on paper, maybe that's not the optimal, but from a practicality standpoint, I'm not gonna hurt myself and I still get some degree of stimulus. And obviously we look at his back and he's been looking in his back and it's like, well, it's not working. Why would you change it type thing? So doing a low back extension, the cool thing about this low back extension, which isn't good or bad, I mean, I could make the argument for the pads up here. So when he's at the top, let's see if I can draw this somewhat accurately. I already messed up. Let me see if I can, so here's the pad. Here's his hips are kind of like right here. So there's his pelvis. This is his spine, you know, and here's the weight on his back. Sorry, this is his spine, all the vertebrae in there. So when he's at the top with this load, this is really where the peak position is. So the only thing that would be different with if you had a different pad, so again, if you had a platform like this, where the pad is like this, and at the top his pelvis was like this, and when his spine is here, so again, it depends on where the range of motion is coming. You could either have more challenge at the hips if he's keeping his spine neutral, or if he's actually rounding his spine to get this position. and he's at that position, you'll have actually a little bit more challenge in that lengthened position of spinal flexion. So that's really going to be the difference. Some people will say, well, what's the difference between this one, where there's this kind of this more old school low back extension? You're going to have more torque in the peak position at the top at full extension, full spinal extension and full hip extension, where you'll have peak torque somewhere down here. Again, if it's rounding an extension to that point in time, you'll have a little bit more in the middle and a little bit less when you come to the top. So again, the way that I always like to coach is it looks like he's keeping a pretty neutral spine. So he's actually picking up a little bit of hip stimulus here as well too, and training the vertebra or training the spinal extensors a little bit more isometrically, which is kind of, in my opinion, doubling up just a little bit of how he's going to train them with a deadlift, but still fine. So again, if there's a slight difference that I would do here, for normal people, I'd probably do the deadlift first, and then I would probably have a little bit more motion in the spinal flexion extension. But if I had an athlete like Dorian that was asking for some help, which would be awesome, then I would say, well, try this order. And then if I got feedback that they said, you know, I feel like I'm going to die if I put my RDLs any earlier in the program, something's going to explode, then I'd say, keep doing what you're doing. It's working, and let's make sure nothing explodes. And then we'll go to deadlifts last. One at a time. Always good advice. Don't do two at a time when you're working out. So, you know, what's the thing here? So he's keeping his knees fairly fixed. So this is a little bit closer to an RDL. Let's see if I can get the bottom. You know, so I say the ideal here, and I have no idea what his mobility and hip flexion ability is or whatever, but that's about the angle that he's at. The best way to get peak challenge on all the spine and the hips would be to have that spine parallel to the ground. But again, the exemption to that is, I don't know if he's trying to keep a neutral spine, which I think for this exercise is a good idea. If someone's range of motion stops here, then ultimately the only way they can get their spine lower is if that comes from active spinal flexion and then pulling out with extension and then finishing coming back to the hips. I'm not saying that's inherently bad, but it doesn't seem like as safe of a practice when you have very, very heavy loads. So again, in my opinion, this is a great stimulus for not just the hips, but also the erectors, just isometrically challenging them to keep the spine still. But if you at home have a little bit more range of motion than Dorian, this is roughly where I would want you to put those things. And then overall, in general, the other things to note through, if you watch this workout again, which again, if you haven't watched it without me talking and drawing, I would highly recommend you go back and watch. I'm not gonna touch a whole lot on, you know, his tempo, his control and all that, but I think it's awesome. And again, so I guess I am gonna touch on it a little bit, but I'm gonna touch on it to highlight it, where there are some times here where he's contracting a little bit more aggressively and some of his transitions look a little bit quicker, but if you watch very, very closely, his transitions are the most important, right? So as he comes to a stretch, even though it kind of looks like he sometimes has some aggressive contractions, aggressively coming through those concentrics, he always has control before it starts. And that can be something that the more advanced you are, the quicker that transition can be while not actually having momentum. So he has a lot of control coming out of those stretch positions. He really has hard contractions and hard squeezes on everything, which again, with the idea of keeping it on your muscle and contracting aggressively, I think is a great idea. And so again, that's a huge thing to emulate. And as we go through more of his workouts, you'll see that repeated over and over and over. That's the whole goal. People get really caught up on tempo now. I don't think overly slow eccentrics are a good idea. I don't think intentionally slow concentrics are ever a good idea. I think the idea of aggressive contractions on concentric is a great idea, but you have to keep it in control. And I think he's one of the best people ever at emulating that. He's controlling it the whole time while having aggressive concentrics. But if you really want to look at I think the main takeaway of how he does that is the transitions are really controlled. So most people, they have the idea of, oh, I want this aggressive concentric, and they end up just bouncing out of the bottom to get there. Well, don't bounce out of the bottom. That's not, again, an aggressive concentric. That's a momentum collision, and then maybe picking it up with a muscle, squeezing it through there. So overall, very, very evident why this resulted in the back that he has. Now, again, the only thing that as I went through there that I kind of nitpicked at all is I think you could make arguments for the exercise sequence there. If lats are your priority, I think this is a great, great order because it was 2 lat things first, kind of an upper back thing from there, then kind of more of a lat row, lower back stuff, and rear delts to finish. If your goal was to have as thick of erectors as possible and you know, you can safely move pretty good amount of weight, you know, don't feel like you're going to explode or blow up. You could probably put your pull early in the workout. But again, all of that really comes down to more of an individual thing. The big things to focus on are exercise selection, why he chose the exercises that he chose, the way that he's performing them. And again, if they're, like I said, the only other thing that will be a little bit different looking through from you to him is if your lats aren't the same size, Don't get fixated on that upper arm position, the bone position, because again, the amount of tissue he has really changes things. Focus more on where he's finishing. So again, if your upper arm should pull towards your lat, again, because the lat attaches that, but that's a great visual for a lot of people. And if you're smaller, your upper arm will just finish closer at your side. You know, if you're bigger, it will finish out here. But overall, it is super exciting for me to get to review Dorian's workouts because, again, he's one of my all-time favorites for everything that you see here. And if you guys, in my opinion, are looking at a good person to emulate for your training, if you can actually study some of the things he did outside the gym, how methodical he was, how great his adherence was, how he did things the exact same day to day, so if he made changes, he knew how he did what. Also having a great thought process, also training very hard, obviously, very heavy, very progressively, a lot of great stuff. And again, in my opinion, that's the joke. If we're going to talk about what, you know, this idea of optimal is, optimal should be something more like Dorian. Now, again, the only thing I say don't get too fixated on is the exact numbers. He is a little bit more of a lower volume guy, which I am as well too. I tend to err on the, you know, less volume is a great place to start and focusing on how you're doing things. And again, I think the better your form is, the better your training is, the heavier the weight you're using. Going that direction can be helpful. Some people I don't think will get the same level of stimulus that he will out of lower volume training. So obviously it can be a good reason too to potentially, you know, maybe use a little bit different volume, play around with that. Don't get too fixated, like I said, on the sequence, but a lot of awesome stuff that we can take away. And so this one was obviously back and rear delts. We're going to get into some more body parts moving in the future. And then ultimately, yes, we'll get into doing some more reviews of more bodybuilders. So if you guys like this, let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see me review some people's exercises or some people's programmings in a more positive light, so don't tag ding-dongs down there because you want me to laugh at them. But if you want me to review some people that are just like, hey, I think this guy's sharp, or I like the way this person does that, or this person's obviously producing good results, then I will do it. I will look at it, I will draw on them, and we'll all get better and watch me watch someone working out. That's really weird. You're watching me watching someone working out? This is a different level of stuff going on right now. But anyway, per the usual, if you guys like this stuff, don't forget to do the YouTube thing, like, subscribe, share. And if you're looking to support the channel, check down in the description below. My app has a bajillion programs, nutrition tracking, one-on-one support, all in one spot. And again, of course, I have this level of thought process that goes into my program design, exercise selection, and all the educational resources on there. Until the next one, guys, appreciate you.